Okay, let's get started. I'm Pastor Bruce Wall. This is Boston Black News, and my guest this evening is William Wright, who is a gentleman who knows and understands a lot about the political world. And it's like I used to talk to Dan Janey many years ago about politics. He would always be challenging me to challenge the church to be engaged. And I miss having him around. And now that you and I are developing our friendship, our relationship, we can be what Danny, Janie, and I were to each other and to the city. You and I can start to do something like that. So I appreciate you being here tonight. And did you watch the election results on election day at night, or did you wait until the next morning to find out who won and who lost?
First of all, I did know Dan Janey, and I remember him well for his work with John O'Brien, who, of course, was the first Black elected school committee member. And last night, I looked at the numbers that were coming in on the official or the unofficial numbers on the city's website.
Yeah. So were there any surprises? Because I was paying closer attention to the at-large city council race really than I was about the other ones. But um, Erin Murphy on the unofficial results stayed at the top of her game. She was number one until the last maybe half hour or 45 minutes of the election, when more of the votes came in. It switched, and Ruthie became the lead vote getter. Were you surprised at all with the at-large, or did you predict that the three incumbents would make it? And did you predict who the fourth person was going to be?
Well, I expected the three incumbents to win re-election, but toward the end of the day, I thought that Lee Walsh was most likely to get the fourth spot with the amount of union backing that she had. Of course, it ended up that Henry Santana, one of the candidates sponsored by the mayor, got that fourth spot eventually.
Right, right. And it was my understanding that Nee Walsh, as you said, was endorsed by a couple of the unions, but this is not her first time running for the city council, if I'm correct. She's done this once before, do you know?
Yes, she came in number 7 the last time she ran out of the 8 finishers.
Okay, so what does Ruthie's first place win say to who will be the next president of the Boston City Council?
As soon as an election is over, the next election has started. And of course, the next election in this case is the election of the city council president. Ed Flynn has done his 2 terms and is term limited. So there will be a new city council president. And by topping the ticket, that's helpful to Ruthie Louis June as the potential next president of the council. And of course, it's also to her benefit that she was cast as the person who headed the committee that finally got a map, a new redistricted map that was approved by the council, the mayor, and the judge in the case.
Well, it's one thing to be the number one vote getter with the at-large victory that she had, but it's another to go behind the scenes and strategize with the other city councilors, because she needs to be voted in by the other councilors. So, I mean, I don't know where she's at with the strategy. I don't know who else might. I kept hearing that Councilor Julia Mahida
Mejia?
was going to actually strategize to be the next city council president. Did you hear that at all?
I did not hear about that, but you're right that whoever will become the next president has to get 7 votes. So right now, of course, a lot of political horse trading is taking place by those who are interested in the position. And generally, what happens is that a candidate will look to get votes by offering certain chairmanships of certain committees to people to support them.
So do you think that Councilor Mejia is an able strategist in being able to work behind the scenes to get the support, or do you think that Aaron Murphy, Aaron Murphy has been working hard in all of the neighborhoods in the city of Boston. I am amazed at the newsletter that she produces and that she sends out. It's usually a newsletter that's a colored newsletter, comes out every month, and it shows her in all the 9 districts talking to key people. And she's done that all year. Literature is important because I was told that City Councilor Julia Mejia did not have the financial resources to be able to send out a mailing for the election, but I was getting a mailing from Ruthie, and I got a mailing from Aaron Murphy, and a few others were sending out mailings. So do you think that Julia Mejia or Ruthie are ready strategically to be able to get those 7 votes to help them become the next president of the Boston City Council?
Well, first of all, it was reported that only about 20% of registered voters went to the polls, which is abysmal for turnout. And of course, we know that many people don't turn out when it's not a mayor's race
Right.
on the ticket as well. But the city council, as you know, had major conflicts last year. And you can see that it's a very fractionalized group of people where, for example, you had 6 white males leave the council since 2019,
Okay.
once Michael Flaherty and Frank Baker leave. And you know now that there is only 1 Italian American on the council, and there will be 4 Irish Americans. There are 3 Dominicans, 1 Haitian, and 1 African American, also with some Caribbean descent. So, and it will be very difficult for the person who needs to get that 7 votes to do enough trading to guarantee the numbers. But we have something now that was reminiscent of Kevin White as mayor in 1981, when he created Kevin 7, the candidates he backed for the city council. This year, we had Wu's crew. We had a number of councilors who were backed by the mayor, and at least 6 of them are now on the council, will be on the council come January.
Yeah.
The problem with that to me, and I first met Kevin White in 1968 when he was first elected. The problem is city councilors should be independent, fiercely independent representatives of their district, or if they're at large, representatives of the city of Boston. They should not be employees of the mayor of Boston. In fact, several of the candidates who won this year had previously been employees of the mayor, and that's Henry Santana, Enrique Pepin, and John Fitzgerald. Now, the question will be, and it will be seen very quickly in the coming year, do the people who are supported by Wu lockstep vote for anything that she wants as far as policy, or do they show some independence? And I have the names, as I mentioned, those 3. You also can include Brian Worrell and Sharon Durkin as part of what I call Wu's crew.
Okay, so it was my understanding that Mayor Marty Walsh also endorsed some of the candidates. How many, if you know, of the candidates that he endorsed actually won?
Well, Jose Ruiz in District 5 was one of the people I know that Marty Walsh endorsed, who did not win. He lost to Enrique Pepin, who was backed by Mayor Wu.
Right.
And while mayor, Marty Walsh had a record of not being very successful in his endorsements of candidates for various offices. Mayor Wu has also had that kind of spotty record, because you will remember when Lydia Edwards was elected to the state senate from the city council, there was a special election to replace her, and Gabriella Coletta won that race against a woman who was supported by Mayor Wu in District 1. And that's one of the problems that Mayor Wu faces. She doesn't know much of the real history of politics in Boston.
Mm.
If she had known the history here, she would know that Coletta had people like John Nucci, Bob Travellini, Bob DeLeo, major political figures in Boston. And the candidate she was backing was somebody who did not work in Boston. She worked in Cambridge and wasn't as well known. And certainly Coletta, having worked for Edwards, had an inside track as well. But some of the things that are problems with Mayor Wu are that she knows things that people tell her politically about history, but she doesn't know them firsthand the way that people who are from Boston know them.
Right.
You remember when she won the election in 2021, she won the election because interim mayor Kim Janey finally got into the race after several months after Marty Walsh had been named to be labor secretary by Joe Biden, while Andrea Campbell was already on track to win that preliminary and become the next mayor of Boston.
Yeah.
By Janey jumping in essence, it split the black vote, and that allowed Michelle Wu and Anissa Sabi George to be the finalists when Campbell, by Wright, should have been the finalist. Janey should have run for city council again. Right now, Mayor Campbell would be in City Hall, and Kim Janey would be in her third term as a city councilor in Boston.
Well,
Other cities,
no, go
other
ahead.
cities tend to make sure that you don't have two strong black candidates running against each other, knocking heads.
Well, that means that there needs to be a comprehensive political strategy in Boston and for the black community, and we don't have that. For example, you look at Edward Flynn. President Flynn won by 7,552 votes, no opposition. That to me, again, has to be strategy, that we pick the candidate, we choose the candidate that we think could win, we get behind that candidate and we win. So again, President Flynn, 7,552 votes. No one opposed him. Then you go and you go to district number 4 with Brian Worrell. No opposition. He gets 4,656 votes. So it was great that no one decided to run against him, but look at the difference: 7,000 or close to 8,000 for Ed Flynn and 4,656 for Brian Worrell. What does that say about us coming out and doing better in voting for the candidates that we support?
Well, obviously the numbers matter. And historically, in the black community, the numbers have been much less than they are in white neighborhoods where people vote religiously. If you go to the Boys and Girls Club on Warren Street on election day,
Yeah.
you'll see people walk in, vote, and walk in 5 to 10 minutes. If you go to Holy Name Church in West Roxbury, there are long lines. And a part of that is because in this city, people have recognized that participation in politics leads to people having the ability to hire people for jobs, which leads to money. So if you ask Black Bostonians, have you ever seen your parents write a check for a politician? Chances are they never saw that. However, in other communities like Irish and Italian, they grow up learning about that, going to candidates nights, holding signs for people who are running for office, even when they're children, right? These are some of the differences. And if you look at Boston as compared to other major cities in the country, most major American cities have had Black mayors. Many have had multiple Black mayors. And in Philadelphia, they just elected the first Black woman to become mayor in that city. Up and down the East Coast, Richmond, Atlanta, Baltimore, you'll see there's been a history of Black mayors for decades. And Chicago's mayor is Black. San Francisco's mayor is Black. Los Angeles mayor is Black. Houston mayor is Black. Boston is a different animal politically.
So,
And part of that history is that, in my opinion, Boston is the last white bastion in this country. They came in through here with the Pilgrims. They murdered the Indians. They grabbed the land. And those people on Beacon Hill and Back Bay, back in the 60s, when the riots took place, many white people fled the inner cities to the suburbs in other cities. Those folks on Beacon Hill and Back Bay with the Charles River view, they were not planning to leave the city, and they would fight to the death to remain here. And now there's a political fight. The Irish influence has been minimized. The Last Hurrah, by Edwin O'Connor, tells the story of how they came as immigrants and rose politically. And that there's only one Italian American on the council is a very unusual situation.
yeah.
And 2021 was the first time in memory that there was not a white Irish male running for mayor. Michael
Well,
Flaherty must have gotten dozens and dozens of calls asking him why he wasn't in that race. And I
right.
understand that he will now be working for the mayor in some capacity.
Now that I have not heard. That I haven't heard. And when I looked at District 7, and then I want us to talk about what strategy should the Black community use going forward, and then we need to talk about what is the Black community going to look like in 10 years. So Tanya Fernandez Anderson and Althea Garrison. Tanya Fernandez Anderson received 3,710 votes, and Althea Garrison 1,500. Even together, that's not significant for the Black community. It should have been a higher number. I thought that Althea Garrison was going to do a whole lot better than she did. I thought that she could have overtaken Tanya because you can't go to sleep on Althea Garrison. What do you think happened there? How did the incumbent win this race?
Well, Althea Garrison this year, the perennial candidate, did not campaign. There
Okay.
were several forums that were planned that would have included her and Tanya Fernandez Anderson, the incumbent, and those were canceled. Generally speaking, Althea Garrison files her papers, but she doesn't really do an effective campaign, much like Roy Owens, another perennial candidate.
Yep.
You have to ask the question sometimes, why are those people like Roy and Althea even in the race? For Althea, it's worked out that she became a replacement city councilor and a replacement state senator when
Yep.
somebody moved on.
Yep.
And we know in Boston, there's a history in recent times of mayors moving on, like Marty Walsh or Ray Flynn, where the city council president, of course, then became the interim mayor. And in the case with Flynn, Tom Menino became the next mayor.
Yep.
And when Marty Walsh went to Washington, Kim Janey became the interim mayor. But I point out that during her time as interim mayor, there was not the support that Menino had, and a large part of that was her delay in getting into the race by several months. That kind of delay in an election year that already started means that people who are writing checks for candidates and are working in campaigns are already committed to other camps. Why in the world would an interim mayor wait? You should announce as soon as it was official, it happened to be January 6th, that Biden appointed Walsh or mentioned that Walsh would be his cabinet secretary for labor.
Right.
So certain figures basically pushed Janey into that race when she was not the candidate who should have been the key candidate. That was Andrea Campbell, who wisely parlayed her attention from that race into running for attorney general and winning that seat.
Right, right. She saw what happened and she didn't give up. She knew she had potential to do that. When I look at her as the attorney general now, see her speaking, watch her posture, it's a whole different person. And she won that race because she really wanted it. There are people who ran for mayor who really didn't want black people. They didn't really want it. They were pushed into running. So let's go back and talk. I talked to Pastor Hobbs and I talked to Priscilla Flint last night or Tuesday night about the Black Political Task Force. What is the strategy going to be moving forward as the Black community? Or what do you think the strategy should be? Because we keep talking about the Black Political Task Force. Can we create something like that. Maybe not the same, but something like that. And if not, what will be the strategy moving forward with so many Black people moving out of Boston? And I'll let you talk. And as soon as I make this statement, Dan Janey and I used to prepare the brochure to help our people make decisions as to who they were going to go vote for in the city of Boston coming out of the church. I prepared a brochure about 5 years ago, and a number of the people in the church came to me and said, this brochure doesn't help me because I don't live in the city. And I would dare say that 3/4 of the people who attend the church, our church, come from the South Shore. So once they leave Boston, if they were engaged politically, once they leave Boston and they go to Randolph and they go to Chelsea, they go to Lynn, they're not politically, they don't tend to be politically engaged. So what are we going to do with the people who are remaining, Black folk who are remaining in the city? Can we muster up a fight, or are we just going to give up?
Well, of course, the Black Men's Political Task Force used to interview candidates, get questions to the candidates and answers, and then decide on which candidate to support, and then cover the polling places with poll cards with the choices. There is a group that's new called the Black Men's Political Task Force, which is headed by Reverend Minyard Culpepper. And we this year had our first candidates night, which was held at Franklin Park at the golf club. And there were 6 of the 8 at-large candidates there, and 4 of the 8 district finalists who appeared and spoke. That kind of organizing is helpful. And of course, many younger people may not realize that at a certain point, there were 9 at-large candidates, or 9 at-large seats, and no district city councilors. That was changed by a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, that the Black Political Task Force and the Boston NAACP filed in order to get a change to make it more fair, because it was almost impossible for a Black candidate to win citywide. Between 1971 and 1981, from Tom Atkins as a counselor to Bruce Bowling, there were no Black city councilors in Boston. So who do you go to see if you have a city problem? The Irish guy, the Italian guy, the Irish woman, the Italian woman, the one Republican, John Sears? There was no one who knew your life as a Black person in Boston to go to. When Bruce ran and won, he came in number 9 just before Jimmy Kelly, and Charles Yancey came in number 11. But the change to districts meant that there would always be representation of Black and Latino folks in the city because of how the districts were devised. And that was an important legal move that took place that allowed that there would always be Black and Latino voices on the council. Now, the way it is now is a lot of factionalism. There were a lot of horrendous verbal debates and arguments that took place. And the media here has written story after story about what they call the dysfunction of the Boston City Council. Mm-hmm. I would contend that a large part of the problem is that the Mayor Wu administration has kind of been like a 40 and under group. And part of the problem with having people who are that young in key positions in the city is that they do not possess institutional history. They don't know what happened in the past personally, and there's hardly anyone there to tell them what happened in the past. That's why when you see a city councilor be elected like Henry Santana, who I believe is about 27 years old, 28 years old, who was the mayor's outreach person for the city, the question would be, who does he know in the neighborhoods? What has he done in the neighborhoods? And is he only there because of what you might call the Wu machine? And therefore, he's beholden to the mayor, and he can be expected to vote with her on every policy issue that comes before the council.
Yeah. Okay, so do you think that there needs to be a regional vision, a regional momentum to get Black and brown people to be politically engaged, not only in Boston, but to be involved in politics throughout the region? Because I remember when Ron Bell was working with Deval Patrick to help him to win his election, they developed a whole regional movement, a statewide movement, obviously, and they went into every single city and town that they can go into, and there was momentum, and the clergy were involved, the activists were involved, and that eventually died down, and it wasn't recreated. We don't have a local, in my opinion, we don't have a successful local or regional plan to get Black people to register to vote and to go out and vote. Leon Rock said the turnout on Tuesday's election was awful. Those who were elected for city council don't have a large enough constituency to actually say they actually represent a significant part of the electorate. Do you agree with his comments?
The numbers say the story. Only 20%. People got elected who had union or other support or other financial support. And the people who made the decisions about who was on the council now were a relatively small group when it was only 2 out of every 10 voters. So in Boston, there's a problem that many Black people buy the notion that it doesn't matter, that your vote doesn't matter, even though it was seen in Julia Mejia's case during her first election in 2019 that she won by a single vote.
Yep.
People in places like West Roxbury, South Boston, who vote historically in large numbers, they know that it matters. And you can imagine, you know, those homes in West Roxbury that have 3 generations in them? There might be the grandparents, the parents, and the kids. There might be 8, 9, or 10 votes in a single household. And that teenager, when that kid turns 18, better walk into that house having registered to vote, or they might not get dinner that night. They know that it translates into people of their group getting jobs and positions and being able to hire other people. That's how it works. And so for a lot of Black people, and Charles Hamilton, he wrote Black Power, he talked about this. If people don't see a result from participation, they're not going to continue to participate.
Right.
And in Boston's history, many people have not seen the results, and therefore they get turned off to the process.
Have you given up on the Black churches in Boston as being one of the, it's not the only one, but one of the vehicles that could make a difference if the clergy, for example, Minister Priscilla Flint Banks was trying, Minister Priscilla Flint was trying to motivate Black pastors who had vans to use their vans to pick people up and drive them to the polls. Nothing really came of that. There was no real response. Have you given up on the Black church's ability to be able to be politically engaged, or do you see a way for us to be able to still challenge the church to be involved?
Well, as you know, as a longtime pastor, there is a serious difference in what the churches were like as far as who was going to church in the past and who is going to church now.
Yep.
What is missing in many churches is Black men.
Yep.
And that's an issue, right? And as you mentioned, people have moved away. If it's Concord Baptist Church in the South End and they moved to Mattapan or to Milton, you know, those people got basically zoned out as places like the South End changed. We know that not that long ago, the South End had many Black and Latino residents. But if you look at it now, people might think it has always been a very white neighborhood. If you stand on West Newton Street at 5 o'clock any workday, who you see coming down the street from the Green Line station into the South End streets, it could just as well be Newton rather than West Newton Street.
Yeah.
So these changes have happened.
You know, when the Harriet Tubman House came down, that symbol, as long as that symbol was still there, there was hope for us to be able to teach our children that Black people used to dominate the South End. But with that gone, people do not know that the NAACP used to have a branch office on Mass Ave in that vicinity. And I don't know how much longer the churches in the South End are going to be able to exist. So there's been a wipeout, a clean out. Leon Rock said he concurs with Bill Wright. He concurs with Pastor Wall. He says, it saddens me that Black folk clearly don't vote in large numbers in Boston. What's going to be the strategy, Bill, in going forward? Because how do we, for example, my wife is not as mobile as she used to be, and she sometimes walks with a cane. And she came to me and said, I'm going to vote. And I said, I will drive you, because I know that it was going to be difficult for her to find a parking space, find a way in, vote, and just come back out. I didn't want to make it that difficult for her. So I dropped her off, drove around the area until she was ready, picked her up and took her home. I made the effort because I felt it was important that we not use my excuse, my medical excuses, or hers to say, I'm not feeling well, I'm not going to go vote. I did the absentee ballot, so I was done, and she went out and she voted. But not every family is going to make that effort, to challenge their children to go vote. What are we going to do, my friend?
Well, of course, we know as Black Americans that many Black Americans were killed just trying to vote. To me, that should be reason enough to make sure that you vote every chance you get. And the other problem that we have is that many of our very talented people, Black people, have left Boston for what we considered greener pastures. And one of the examples, of course, a sterling example, is H. Carl McCall, who grew up in Roxbury on Harold Street, who went to Roxbury Memorial High School, to Dartmouth College, to St. Andrews in Scotland, and to Andover Newton Theological. He is also a minister. But in New York City, he became a New York State Senator. And while I worked for him as his press secretary and legislative aide, we cleaned up a drug problem in Harlem that got national media attention. And President Carter appointed him a Deputy United Nations Ambassador in 1979. He later became the state comptroller for New York. So every New York State check had his signature. He headed the largest pension group in the world. And he eventually became the candidate for governor of New York, the Democratic candidate in 2002, just after the 9/11 disaster. People like McCall and others in other fields, stellar people, leave Boston, go to school somewhere else, go to college somewhere else, and they recognize that the level of racism isn't quite what it is in the place where they grew up. And that is why a lot of them do not return. And a lot of the leaders from our community are leading communities elsewhere. So how do you change that? That's the $64,000 question.
Well, it is a major question, and it needs to be analyzed, and we've got to come up with a solution, because well, as parents, a lot of us are struggling with our children saying, unless Karen and I make a decision to give this house to our children, they're saying they're looking outside of Boston to live. They're not looking at Boston as a viable place to live. They want to work here, but they're all commuting in from Taunton and Fall River, and it's crazy to see what happens. And it's like, how do we stop this slide? There's so many particular things that are confronting us now as Black people in the city that we can't handle them all at the same time. You're right. It is a question that I'm really trying to struggle with in my mind, but I can't come up with any solutions. For example, Pastor Minion Culpepper, when he had the political forum at Franklin Park, what was the number of people who actually came out to be a part of that?
Well, it was a rainy evening, and yet there might have been 50 to 60 voters who showed up.
That's
And
significant.
and what's also interesting is that of the candidates who did not show up, those included Henry Santana, a Black man, Sean Nelson, a Black man, and Joel Richards, a Black man. Believe it or not, Richards' opponent, John Fitzgerald, did show up. I can imagine he was amazed to find that his challenger was not present in
Right.
the forum being held by the Black Men's Political Task Force.
Well, then well, let me also say that Minister Priscilla had a forum with the at-large candidates. Do you think that some of these folk that have these great plans need to find a way to work together to have these forums, rather than trying to do 5 or 6 or 7 of these forums to get Black people to come out?
Well, I don't think it's impossible to do more than one forum and have more than one group doing them. But what we have in Boston is a history of people making their side deals. And the powers that be, whether it's the vault or whether it's white politicians, male and female, they recognize that they can, in essence, do divide and conquer. And divide and conquer since the Roman days still works. So people make their decisions to be assisting different politicians. You mentioned about people moving to the South Shore and elsewhere. Back when there was a major snowstorm in Boston, people living in places like Brockton, let's say, who took the bat bus into work every day, they couldn't get into town. People who had vehicles couldn't get into town. Some who got into town had to stay overnight if they could because they couldn't get back on the road. That's part of the problem of when you leave the city boundaries of Boston. Then you don't have the great access to the great medical institutions that are here. You don't have the ability to use public transportation to get to your job. These are things that we knew growing up here in public housing in Mission Hill, where I grew up, and other places in the city. We lived in public housing in Mission Hill, but Children's Hospital was right down the street. The Museum of Fine Arts was not too far from where we lived. We could get to downtown jobs. We got this exposure to cultural, the Symphony Hall,
Yeah.
sports with the Boston Garden.
Yeah.
So when you cross those boundaries out of the city of Boston, you lose. Your family loses. You might have a larger house in another place that costs you less, but you lose access. And everybody wants to live in Boston. The reason why people want to live in Boston, Deutsche Bank did a study and showed that wealthy Europeans, Europeans of means, many of them wanted to buy a condo in Boston. If they're immigrating to the country, Boston was their first choice city. Their children go to school here. Many of them went to school here. So what their children say is, Mom, Dad, buy a condo. I can live there while I'm going to BU or MIT or wherever they're going to school. When you visit, you don't need a hotel room. You have an apartment. And the value of that condominium is only going to increase. Look at Boston. Look at the construction cranes. Look at how tower condominium buildings are going up in every possible location in the city.
Mhm. Bill, I've seen that same strategy on the reverse for down south, of people selling their homes, going to the city, the state where their children are going to college, and they buy the condominium at a cheaper price. They live there, and the child lives there, and not lives on the campus. But one of the other things that we need to also talk about with regards to politics and people leaving the city. Years ago, Black folk would leave Boston and go south. They would migrate to the south. Some people didn't like it. Some people didn't like the medical facilities. They didn't like access to it or lack of access. So they came back to Boston. That was easy to do. If you leave Boston today and you sell your house, you sell your home, and you go and you buy yourself a beautiful home at a reduced rate, if you don't like it, you can't come back. There's no coming back.
It's a
You're not
one-way
going to be able to buy in. It's done. And I
it's a
and I
one-way
think
it's a
that's
one-way
happening.
ticket. It's a one-way ticket
I
now.
like that. I like that. I'm going to use that. It is today. It's a one-way ticket, and a lot of
You,
our folk don't understand that.
but you can use that with attribution, of course.
Say that again.
You can use that line with attribution where you got it from.
Well, let me say, one of the reasons why at our church we show a Black video. There's a lady in the church who prepares videos every single week. She's working on a video because we're trying to give our people Black history from Black people that's correct. And there have been a few people who were complaining and saying, why aren't we showing other people's history? we can show Black history and teach Black history until I die and still not get it all in. So we're going to stay doing what we're doing. And the person who's done it has done a lot of Black history around voting rights and what happened many years ago in the South. And I hope our people are looking at it and gaining an understanding. Unfortunately, because I have not been in church, uh, I went last Sunday for the first time since August. I wasn't there to motivate and challenge the people to get before the people to tell them to go out and vote. But there's a lot of work that we have to do, Bill, because our time is running out in the city, and Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan is virtually gone, in my opinion. And if we can't garner the support of the candidates, for example, I have a lot of candidates who call the church wanting to be on our radio station. So what they're saying, black and white, what they're saying is that they believe that our radio station, maybe not the best station in the town, has access to people that they want to speak to. So we've got to find a way, Bill, to use this radio and TV station as a way for not just politicians to use it to get to our folk, but for us to use it to get to our folk. What do you think?
Well, we certainly don't want to have in the future a time when people say, remember when Black people used to live in Roxbury, as they could have said about Beacon Hill and other parts of the city in South Bend. And with the work I did with Doris Bunty, the former state rep at the Boston Housing Authority, she was the administrator when we did desegregation of public housing. And if you look at the numbers, there might have been 60,000 families
Yeah.
that either lived in public housing developments or had Section 8 certificates that allowed them to be able to live in the city of Boston. Without that assistance, they could not live here. The other thing to think about is if you look at the developments in South Boston in particular, the McCormick development in Old Colony, that's public housing on the waterfront.
Yeah.
That does not exist in many parts of the country. It exists there because John McCormick was the speaker when they first got the federal money back in the 40s, and that has a lot of public housing. Boston's the fourth largest public housing stock in the country, even though we're not the fourth largest city. Look at South Boston's waterfront and think about Revere Beach and all the condominium developments that have been built there. It looks like a Miami North. You can imagine that developers are licking their chops, hoping to be able to get that property at some point.
Yeah.
And it's only been since the 80s when we did the desegregation that large numbers of Black and Latino families live over there. But again, Boston is the choice place to live. Everybody comes through here. So many future international leaders and local leaders get their education here. And we understand why the pressure is coming in. And it should be a balance. Gentrification should not mean that the longtime residents, and many residents, white and Black, will say to us in campaigns, I'm concerned that my children and grandchildren can't afford to live in the same neighborhood where they grew up. It should not be that way.
Well, I appreciate the time that you've given me to have a conversation like this, because we have to have a conversation after an election that we just had. We have to analyze it. I've got to get Ron Bell. I've got to get other people who understand the politics of the city and state on like you, so that we can have a thorough discussion and motivate our people to listen to this discussion, because we have to educate. We have to be educated, and then we have to educate our people if we want to see a change in the city of Boston. I'll give you the final words. What would you say to those who are listening and trying to understand why they should participate in the electoral process?
Well, we should certainly participate because, of course, there's a need for unity among Black people. But in addition, we have seen the current mayor, Michelle Wu, be somebody who has gone against 77% of the residents who declared they wanted a return to elected school committee with an accountable school committee, knowing that the system was almost in receivership by the state. To me, it is astounding that any politician would go against the wishes of such a large majority of their constituents. So the fight is continuing. The next battle is the council presidency, which probably will lead to who become the next mayor of Boston.
So how would you strategize for Black people to be engaged and involved in who the next president of the Boston City Council? Because it's not like we're voting; it's going to be the votes coming from the city council members who will ratify who the next president is going to be. How can we have any impact on the new president for the Boston City Council?
That's why it's important that there are district city councilors. People have the opportunity to be in touch with their city councilor in their district, as well as all of the 4 at-large councilors, and let their wishes be known. And the thing to remember is we can vote them in and we can also vote them out.
So the next political strategy right now for us is to find a way to have some impact, and I don't know how, to be honest with you, to have some impact on who the next president of the Boston City Council is going to be. That's the next strategy. You agree?
Exactly, exactly.
Well,
Full disclosure, I interviewed Lucy Louis-June for Columbia College when she was a senior at Boston Latin School, and she has tremendous skills in academic background, in political experience on a national level, having been the lead attorney for U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren during her presidential race.
well, we actually happen to have Minister Priscilla came in for a few moments. She's actually in right now. Minister Priscilla, we've been talking about the results of the election and why the election turned out the way that it turned out. Now we're just about done. We're just about finished, and we're talking about the next president of the Boston City Council. Do you have any thoughts on either who that should be, or do you have any thoughts on how we can be involved in motivating the city councilors to vote for the candidate that we would like to see?
I don't know how we would do that unless we start lobbying them, telling them who we want, and attending those weekly meetings. At least they see our faces down there every week, and if we get in there early, like at 11:30, we can get a chance to go and lobby those elected officials before they even come on the floor.
Right. So, Bill and Priscilla, is there a particular set date for that election to take place?
Oh, I believe it happens early in January, as soon as they're sworn in.
Yeah,
So
after they're sworn in, I think that's when they do it.
Well, wait. After they're sworn in on that particular day, they do it? Is
Yeah,
that
yes.
wow.
But they already know who it's going to, because they have to paint their offices and stuff. So they know they'll know before that day who the president's gonna be. And from I've heard that because Bootsy topped the ticket, it's gonna be her. But I heard this before she topped the ticket, that it was mumblings that she already had her votes. But I agree. I feel like we should have a say in who we want to be the city council president. It's like we don't get a real chance to say a lot of anything. And when we do, a lot of times they ignore us. Did you watch my show this morning with Miranda Pass?
You know, I actually,
Yes, I did.
I'm gonna watch the rerun.
Of course, I don't miss your show.
All right.
Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. You like my show?
I like your show. I watch it every chance I get to watch it. And you have good guests on, and you ask them great questions. When you asked William King
Thank
about
you.
the
Thank you.
13-member city council, he was talking about an even numbered council, some kind of hybrid. And you made the great point that you have to have an odd number, otherwise you'd have a tie almost all the time.
Yeah.
Well,
He didn't make it.
go ahead, Priscilla.
But I wish everybody that Michelle wanted, won. Pippin, Santana, and the guy, District 5, what's his name? I can't remember his name.
And Fitzgerald, Wu's crew.
Right, it's Wu's crew, but we gotta bust Wu's crew up because now more than ever, we're gonna have to pay attention to that city council because I don't like, so we have, but one thing I like, and I don't even know if it makes any difference. We have 3 of our at-large city councils are people of color. We have Haitian, Dominican, and we have 2 Dominicans and a Haitian at large.
Well,
And
we'll spend more time talking about this, and we have 1 minute to go, so we've got to stop. But Priscilla, thanks for jumping in, and
yeah, why you wait till the show's over before you call me?
I knew that you had a show today, and I wanted this to be reserved for Bill and myself. And he was saying a lot of things that you were saying. That's why I sent you a text to say that somebody is also thinking the same way that you're thinking. So we'll do this again.
Yeah.
And
Here's your picture, Priscilla. I have your
I
picture on the
appreciate-
wall.
Huh?
I have your picture on the wall in my living room
My picture?
from your
Really?
poster, from your campaign
Oh, I
poster.
see.